A profound, attentive silence descended, heavier than the previous applause. It was the quiet of an audience settling in for a minor, perhaps poignant, spectacle. Viktor Stepanovich pushed back his chair. The sound of wood scraping on parquet was startlingly loud. He moved slowly, with a deliberate, almost weary gravity, as if crossing a great distance. In his hand was not a velvet box or a thick, promising envelope. It was a standard, letter-sized white envelope. It was flat, thin, utterly unadorned. No ribbon, no seal, not even his name written upon it. It looked less like a gift and more like a piece of administrative correspondence. From the high table, Tamara Genadievna's perfectly penciled eyebrow arched a millimeter. A silent, knowing glance flickered between her and Raisa, a shared understanding of inevitable, embarrassing frugality. Leonid, leaning back in his chair, allowed a small, almost imperceptible sigh to escape his nostrils. He crossed his arms over his broad chest, the picture of a man patiently, indulgently, witnessing a foregone conclusion. His expression was not unkind, merely resigned to the presentation of something pitifully insignificant. Viktor did not approach the microphone. He did not address the room. He walked directly to his daughter. The distance seemed to stretch, every step measured in the gaze of 200 eyes. He stopped before her. Alina looked up, her face a fragile mask of expectant gratitude, already preparing the soft, forgiving smile she used as a shield for him. He did not place the envelope on the gift table. He held it out directly to her. His voice, when he spoke, was low, not much more than a murmur, yet in the cathedral-like quiet, it carried to the very back rows. It was clear, stripped of all tremor, and terrifyingly calm. "For you, Alinishka," he said, using the more intimate, childhood form of her name. "Read it yourself." Alina's rehearsed smile faltered. She took the envelope, her fingers brushing against his calloused ones. It was light, alarmingly so. The flimsiness of it in her hands felt like a betrayal of the moment. A nervous titter escaped from somewhere in the room, quickly stifled. Her movements were mechanical. She slid a finger under the flap, the tear of paper absurdly loud. She pulled out a single sheet of plain white paper, folded in thirds. Unfolding it, she saw it was typed, dense with text, with official-looking letterheads visible at the top. She began to read. At first, her face was a blank page, reflecting only the effort of comprehension. Then, a slight frown creased her brow. Her eyes, tracking the lines, widened. The color drained from her cheeks so completely, so swiftly, that Aunt Zoya, from her seat, half rose, a hand flying to her mouth, fearing the girl would faint. Alina reached the bottom. Her hands lowered the paper slightly. She slowly lifted her gaze from the page to her father's face. He was looking back at her, not with anxiety or apology, but with an expression of profound, exhausted peace. It was the look of a man who has just set down a back-breaking load he has carried for a lifetime. Her lips formed a word, silent at first, then a breathy, disbelieving whisper that the microphone near the top table picked up and amplified into a ghostly echo across the hall. "Papa." The single sheet of paper passed from Alina's numb fingers to Artem's outstretched hand. He took it with a look of puzzled obligation, his expression clearly asking, "What now? What scrap of sentimentality could possibly follow what my family has given?" He began to scan the text, his brow furrowed in mild annoyance. The transformation was not immediate, but a creeping glacial shift. The annoyance in his eyes froze, then shattered into shards of pure confusion. His lips, slightly parted, moved silently over the words. Confusion deepened, hardened into disbelief. He blinked, as if clearing a film from his eyes, and read a line again. The disbelief then collapsed inward, replaced by a dawning, visceral shock that seemed to physically hollow him out. The confident posture he'd held all day dissolved. His shoulders slumped, his knees appeared to weaken. He did not so much sit as allow himself to fall back into his chair, the paper trembling now in his grasp. He stared, unseeing, at the damning text, a man watching the landscape of his entire life crack and slide into the sea. "Artem! Artem!" Tamara's voice was a sharp blade of panic slicing through the silence. She was on her feet, her composure shattered. She rushed to him, not as a mother to comfort, but as a general to secure vital intelligence. She snatched the paper from his limp fingers. Her eyes raced over the typed lines. The blood, a moment ago high in her cheeks from wine and triumph, vanished. Her face became the color of cold ash, a stark, dead white against the crimson of her lips. The paper fluttered in her grip. The letter did not offer congratulations. It delivered a verdict. It began not with a greeting, but with a date 23 years past. It spoke of a partnership forged in the grime and hope of a rented basement, a single, struggling auto parts store called Startline. It detailed how Viktor Stepanovich Zaitsev had invested his entire inheritance, sold his parents' tiny dacha, and taken a crushing loan, pouring every ruble into inventory and rent. It described how his partner, Leonid Antonovich Gromov, brought less capital but a silver tongue and a network of contacts. Then, with cold, procedural language, it documented the betrayal. 2 years in, as Startline began to turn a profit, Leonid, with the aid of a compliant notary and a slick lawyer, fabricated a backdated shareholder agreement. Viktor's signature was forged, his initial investment recast as a personal loan, long since supposedly repaid in minuscule wages. One Monday morning, Viktor arrived to find the locks changed. He was no longer a founder. He was a dismissed employee, accused of theft and chronic absenteeism. The letter outlined the subsequent legal slaughter. Leonid, now flush with the business's profits, unleashed a torrent of motions and countersuits. Judges, influenced or indifferent, dragged the process out for years until Viktor's funds and spirit were utterly exhausted. The stress was a toxin. It seeped into his home, where his young wife, Natalia, was battling the first insidious cells of an illness. The shame, the constant, grinding anxiety, the loss of hope, they were accelerants. She passed away just months after the final, devastating court ruling, leaving Viktor with a 5-year-old daughter and a silence so deep it was a sound in itself. But the letter did not end in the past. Its final paragraphs were its true explosive core. It stated that for 20 years, Viktor Stepanovich had not surrendered. He had worked his factory shifts, raised his girl, and with the meticulous patience of a master watchmaker, had collected evidence. A carbon copy of the original partnership agreement, salvaged from a discarded storage box. Sworn affidavits from the old landlord and a former delivery driver. Bank transfer records the lawyer had thought buried. A crumpled, handwritten note from Leonid himself, discussing the Zaitsev problem. And then, the coup de grace, certified copies. A case initiation order from the regional prosecutor's office, dated 3 months prior, for fraud on a particularly large scale. And beneath it, the conclusive forensic document examiner's report, stating definitively that the signature purporting to be Viktor's on the falsified shareholder agreement was a non-original fabrication. The sums listed from the original business were enough to constitute grand larceny. The statute of limitations had not run out. The letter's final, unadorned lines stated the maximum possible penalty, deprivation of liberty for a term of up to 10 years. The wealth in this room, the auto shops, the electronic stores, the construction supply chain, it was not built on ambition. It was built on a specific, documented crime. The gift was not a blessing. It was an indictment. The silence that followed was not mere quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking the air, the music, the very possibility of celebration out of the hall. It was broken by a raw, guttural sound, part roar, part choke. Leonid erupted from his seat. His chair toppled backwards with a deafening crack against the parquet. His face, once a portrait of sanguine confidence, was now a grotesque mask of apoplectic fury, mottled with purple and crimson. He pointed a trembling, sausage-like finger at Viktor, who had not moved from his spot beside the stunned bride. "You!" Leonid bellowed, the words spraying spittle. "You scheming, poisonous worm. All these years, you were pretending? Playing the meek little mouse?" Viktor Stepanovich turned to face him. He did not flinch. The stoop seemed to have left his shoulders. He stood now with a weary, unshakable solidity, like an ancient tree that has weathered 100 storms. His voice, when it came, was still low, but it cut through Leonid's rage with the clarity of a scalpel. "I was not pretending, Lyonia," he said, using the old, familiar diminutive with devastating coldness. "I was waiting. There is a difference. I'll destroy you." Leonid screamed, taking a lurching step forward, but held back by the sheer density of the frozen tableau around him. "I'll grind you into the dirt you crawled from. I have people." "You had people," Viktor corrected him, his gaze unwavering. 23 years ago. You had a lawyer who knew which palms to grease. You had judges who saw a beaten man and a rising star and chose their side. You used them to take everything. Not just the money from that basement. You took my health. You took my peace. And you took Natalia." He paused. The name of his dead wife hung in the air, a sacred relic dropped in a mud pit. The charged silence allowed every word to land with the weight of a tombstone. "You didn't pull the trigger, Lyonia. But you loaded the gun. The shame, the courts, the sleepless nights wondering how to feed my girl, it was a cancer. It ate at her faster than the disease in her bones. I buried her when Alina was 5 years old. She asked me why her mama wouldn't wake up." Viktor's voice finally hit a rough edge, not of tears, but of a grief so long fermented it had turned to something hard and sharp. "I had no answer for her. What could I say? That a man she called Uncle Leonid had stolen our future and her mother's will to fight." He turned his head slowly, his eyes sweeping over the petrified, expensive crowd, over the uncles with their stalled deals, the aunts with their frozen smiles, over Tamara who stood clutching the damning paper as if it were a live wire, her face a slack ruin. "You broke us," Viktor stated, addressing them all now. "And then you walked past. You built your houses and bought your cars and told your sons stories of your great success." His eyes locked back on Leonid. "And never once, Lyonia. Never once did you look down at the foundation and remember whose bones you built it on." He then turned his back on the groom's family entirely. His gaze found his daughter. Alina was standing rigid, tears carving silent paths through her makeup, her eyes pools of shattered understanding. "Alinka," he said, his voice softening into a profound, unbearable tenderness. "I love you. Whatever comes next, whatever you decide, remember that. This," he gestured vaguely at the letter, "at the hall, this was my burden. My account to settle. Not yours. You were meant to live. To love. To dream without this shadow. The choice now is yours." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and walked towards the grand exit. His stride was not triumphant, but definitive. The backs of his simple blue jacket were straight. He did not look back. At the massive oak doors, he stopped. He did not turn fully, but spoke over his shoulder, his voice carrying one last time in the breathless hall. "The door is closed, Lyonia." And then he was gone. The spell broke into a chaos of quiet devastation. The wedding did not end. It disintegrated. Guests rose from their tables as if from a bomb blast, gathering coats and purses with fumbling hands, avoiding each other's eyes, muttering excuses that died in their throats. The waiters stood like statues against the walls. Tamara Genadivna let out a strangled sob and fled towards the service doors, the sound echoing like a wounded animal's cry. Leonid, his fury collapsed into trembling terror, was already fumbling for his phone, his thumbs slipping on the screen as he whispered, "My lawyer. Get me Petr Ivanovich, now." Artem remained in his chair, a monument to shock, staring at the space where his new father-in-law had stood. Alina, looking at the man who was now her husband, saw only a stranger, the son of the man who orphaned her in all but name. Slowly, mechanically, she reached up, unpinned the delicate lace veil from her hair, and let it fall to the empty chair beside her. It was a white flag of surrender, but to what battle? Even she did not yet know. Time did not heal. It simply layered the event with a thin sedimentary crust of routine, beneath which the raw fracture remained. Artem and Alina did not divorce. The union, so publicly consecrated and so spectacularly shattered, became a private, silent pact of mutual bewilderment. They moved into the gifted apartment, its tasteful furniture and sterile walls a constant reminder of the poisoned well from which it sprang. Something fundamental had cracked between them, the innocent bridge of affection replaced by a narrow, cautious causeway of shared trauma. They spoke of groceries, of utility bills, in voices careful and flat. The space between them in the large, quiet bed was a chasm filled with unasked questions and the ghost of a shared surname. The law, in its grinding, impersonal way, ran its course. Leonid's money and remaining influence could not erase the forensic report or Viktor's mountain of evidence, now formally in the possession of the state. He was convicted of large-scale fraud. His age, his previously clean record, and a battalion of character witnesses secured a suspended sentence, sparing him the bars of a cell. But the civil judgment was ruinous. The business empire, the auto shops, the service centers, the shares in the construction stores, was dismantled, its assets liquidated in a humiliating public auction to satisfy the colossal compensation order. Viktor Stepanovich wanted none of it. The money, the reclaimed fortune, was to him just another form of the poison. He instructed his lawyer to transfer the entirety of his awarded share to the city hospice. Not to a general fund, but specifically earmarked for the wing where his Natalia had spent her final, pain-racked days. It was not a donation, it was a repatriation. A closing of a specific, cruel circle. Alina began visiting her father in his old communal apartment most evenings. They did not speak of the wedding or Leonid or the trial. They sat at his small, scarred kitchen table, drinking strong tea from chipped cups. The silence between them was no longer the silence of hidden pain, but a shared, weary space. He would look at her, and she would see the 20-year vigil in the new, deep lines around his eyes. One such evening, the steam from their cups rising in a frail column between them, she finally gave voice to the central question. "Papa," she asked softly, her fingers tracing a crack in the table's veneer. "Is it better now? Do you feel lighter?" Viktor turned his gaze from her to the dark window, where the reflection of their dim kitchen lamp floated like a lost moon. He was silent for a long time. "No, Dachka," he said finally, the word heavy with a lifetime's truth. "It is not better. Vengeance is not medicine. It doesn't heal the wound. It only nails the door shut." He looked back at her, his eyes the same calm, sad pulse she had always known. "The pain stays. It becomes a part of the room you live in. Always." He paused, took a slow sip of his tea, the sound loud in the quiet. Then, almost in a whisper, as if confessing a fragile, hard-won secret, he added, "But the door is shut. And that is something. It is finally and completely shut."